Hi, and welcome to the Intuitive Insights podcast series. I'm Nina Lockwood, the founder and chief exec of Intuitive Talent Solutions. We work with leading transport organisations in the UK and bring them together with a diverse and talented candidate network for interim and permanent roles. The people who know me know that I like to immerse myself in good conversation. And over the course of the podcast series, I will be joined by some exceptionally talented leaders from the UK transport sector to talk about their careers, the industry, leadership, challenges and opportunities, and much more besides. I do hope that you'll join me and that you'll be inspired by my fabulous guests and their intuitive insights. My guest today is Fraser Pithie, whose current role is Customer Account Manager at Network Rail, but who has been an absolute champion of the Community Rail Network for many years, focusing on the Friends of the Shakespeare line in the Midlands, Stratford-upon-Avon. I hope you enjoy this conversation. I find Fraser so incredibly interesting and inspiring. So enjoy, share with your network, let me know what you think. Thanks for joining us. Fraser Pithie, Customer Account Manager at Network Rail in Birmingham and trustee of Friends of the Shakespeare line. A very, very warm welcome to the Intuitive Insights podcast. It's lovely to see you.
Hello, Nina. It's great to catch up.
Thank you for joining me. We were introduced, first of all, weren't we, by in real life, by Faye Eaton at the West Mid stakeholder event last year. But we'd been aware of each other on Twitter, I think, before then. I see your name popping up often on my Twitter timeline. So I knew something of you, but once I'd met you and I realised that there was a lot of depth of knowledge in terms of community rail, which is one of my personal passions, then I thought we really need to find out more about who you are, where you've been, what you've done, and what value you're adding now in terms of that community rail piece. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation. People haven't tuned in to listen to me, they've tuned in to listen to you. So I'm going to stop waffling and I'm going to invite you to take us back in time a bit, take us back to the beginning of your career and tell me the story, give us a whistle-stop tour of where you've been and how you've ended up in the role that you're currently doing today, which I understand Denise Wetton at Network Rail in Central Route has enticed you out of retirement to do this role. So I'm looking forward to hearing more about it.
Okay, thanks, Nina. Yes, so to answer your question then about where did it all start, one has to go back probably a little bit before I actually took my first job to understand where I found myself. So and there's a couple of three things that are linked in. And it starts probably when I'm 7 or 8 years, well, I was 7 years old, and I was taken by my grandfather to Stratford-on-Avon railway station where they were doing the last rides on the footplate, wouldn't be allowed these days, on steam locomotive. And that steam locomotive was Cluncastle, which happens to be one that's been renovated and is still in main line use. Little did I know that experience sort of infected me, for want of a better expression. But the reason I was there that day was a much sadder reason, which I, at 7 years of age, didn't really understand. And it was the fact that my granddad had took me to Stratford Station because it's right next door to Stratford-on-Avon Hospital, where my father was dying. And I didn't really understand that at the time. He clearly took me away and up there to enjoy the trains. My mum was obviously having her last few moments with her husband. I lost my father very shortly after that point, and then Mum brought me up on her own. At 16, therefore, I felt I needed to go out and get work. Right. So I just wanted to give that bit of a context, because then that made my choices at 16 different. The sort of things I wanted to do all needed colour vision, and I haven't got total colour vision. I've got defective colour vision, like a lot of males. So that ruled out, certainly back in the mid-70s, a lot of roles and jobs that I would have naturally applied for. So after spending a short period of time at a local tractor stores as a storeman, selling international harvester parts, which at that time were made in Doncaster, I applied for a job at Severn Trent Water Authority, as it was then, as what was known as a district inspector. Now, I had no career trajectory. I had no big plan about things. It was about getting to work and feeling that I'd got to get to work, get a job, support my mom, who'd supported me in growing up, and help her situation improve. And I'd achieved that, and went for this job at Severn Trent and managed to get it. And that largely then became my role, my career as things progressed. So for the first 12 years, I was a district inspector, basically a man in a van that went round, dealt with water mains, burst water mains, dealt with customers, all those sorts of things. And in the early 90s, I got my break at going from what was then inspector to superintendent, latterly called supervisor.
Right.
And one thing led to another, and the right person came along within the company that was a person that didn't see other folks as threats, but saw them as opportunities, or people that could perhaps add something to the business and organisation, and gave me a shot at the next level of assistant manager. And then, without going into all the granularity of it, the rest, as they say, is history. So for the purposes of today, I went from literally a person at the coalface at the sharp end, and I'm very proud of that, because I think that grounding, that understanding, you absolutely take with you then the fact that the triangle should always be inverted to supporting the people that are the face of your organisation at the front end to satisfy and excel with the customers that they're dealing with. And I like to think that I took that with me, and I went through the organisation. Just a few breaks happened at certain points that worked for me, and I became Severn Trent's senior operations manager in 2005, a post of which I took early retirement from in 2011, and then went back into an interest, really, which I've always had, which has been railways. And throughout my life, I've been involved in that, because I knew I couldn't work on the railways as such in operational roles for the reasons I've already said. I did the next best thing, which was support the railways by encouraging people to use the train, trying to stop the then British Railways Board from closing the railway between Stratford and Birmingham, which they tried in 1984, but thankfully we succeeded in persuading them not to do that. And then going back to when I took the early retirement, basically then I started to do quite a lot of photography, got to know people like Nigel Harris, Chris Milner, and others, and Phil Sherritt at Modern Railway. So some key players in the railway industry that I have to say all of them do tremendous work in extolling the virtues of the industry and speaking up for rail. The railway industry's got a lot to thank those guys for, and I'm the first to recognise and say that. And then I got very much involved around the COVID period of how do we get communities more involved in the railway? How do we reconnect people and from the community and the railway? And I felt that there was a big gap there. So I started really getting immersed in that. And the result of it was the recruitment of some 90 volunteers to cover 18 stations, all stations between Stratford and Birmingham. And the result of that has been absolutely tremendous in terms of the inward investment, and that's a key element that's been attracted into the railway. So the railway is an effective beneficiary of that, but also, and more importantly, the local economies and the local communities. And as a result of all that, I came into contact with some really good guys at Network Rail, particularly the then manager at New Street, Patrick Power, a really customer-focused guy who just gets it. And then I got introduced to Denise, who is truly an inspirational director at Network Rail that absolutely sees the customer central to everything, that understands and absolutely inspires others to, it's all about can, it's find reasons why we can do things, knows too much of an easy answer. We're here to give an answer that's better than that, and that answer should be more times than not yes. That's pretty much where I am.
Brilliant. That was a really fantastic whistle-stop tour. I'm always curious to know, when people describe their career stories to me, there's generally is a kind of, there'll be a mention of, I just got lucky, or I was in the right place at the right time. And the phrase you've used were there was a few breaks throughout your career where, the right person came along and recognised or was prepared to accept that other people in the organisation were due for promotion and weren't a threat. What do you think it was about you that put you in the right place for these type of people to spot you and give you that opportunity, Fraser? So for anyone who's earlier on in their career and they want to know how to position themselves for those type of opportunities, what would your advice be?
Might I say, Nina, I think that's a really cracking question. And if in giving an answer to it, I can help at least one person, as you say, who's a younger member in an organisation, make the right decisions, then it's all worth it, isn't it? Yeah, there are a couple of things really, and I'm going to be totally honest. At my age, you can be, and I would say I'll put both sides of the coin. That there are people who, so at any point of where you are in an organisation, this is my experience anyway, so it's personal experience. There are people that will see people that are working for them or working in the organisation and can see the value they bring. And they will either see them in one of two ways. They'll either see them, that's a person we need to see whether we can broaden their experience, potential getting on, where are they, should they be in their succession plans, all that sort of thing. Or they'll see them because of their own inadequacies as a threat. Yeah. So therefore, might go out of their way to make sure that the opportunity doesn't go that way, or other people who might be seeing some potential in the individual get diverted away from them. Now, obviously, you can't write all those things that go on because blood's thicker than water and all the rest of it. Yeah. But one tip that I would give is this. Early on, I know I'm always fairly honest about things, and I've always been prepared to say what needs to be said when it needs to be said. Now, there's a couple of things around that I had the benefit of worldly advice from people I was lucky enough to know who were older. And one person said to me, you don't have to shout to make your point, because your point, if it's strong, will stand anybody's examination. And I always tried to hold on to that. And the other one was, when you've got an issue to raise and a problem to raise, try and present it with a solution or an idea of a solution. So at least then, if you go to your manager or whoever it is that you're speaking and say, look, I need to tell you about this. This is a situation, and it might be pretty grim stuff. But do you know what? I've thought about it, and I think if we did this, this, and this, we could probably address it. Now, it might not be the total answer, but the person who's the recipient of that message will think, fair play. They've come to me and told me what I need to hear, and the fact that they've thought through what we might be able to do to sort it out. Now, it may be that they come up with a slightly different solution because they're more experienced, whatever, but you'll get recognised for approaching it in that way. Yeah. Early days, I probably was guilty of producing problems to people, and I did used to produce solutions, but probably not every time. And that can then lead some people thinking, oh, I don't particularly like that individual because all they ever do is bring me problems. But the other issue, which came to fore a bit later in my career, was when I was further up the tree, I got to run things like recruitment assessment days. And this was about bringing people on that were already in the organisation, because I was very keen that, yes, it's about encouraging and getting in a really good cadre of people from the graduate entry, from external businesses, but it's also about developing the people with experience in your organisation to grow and move through that organisation, because they bring a critical element as well. So when I was in those assessment centres, some fascinating things happened, because you can't help but put yourself back in the position where you were some time ago. Yeah. And I remember particularly an assessment centre, and I got a view about the 6 or 7 people that were there. And there was this one particular girl who worked overnight in what we called the out of hours team. So because the phones have to be around 24 hours a day, because obviously mains can burst at 3 in the morning and so on and so forth, you have to have that facility. Now, what was known as the out of hours teams functioned basically from around 9 at night until about 7:30 in the morning. Those people tended to be a lot more resourceful because they had to be, because they haven't got the whole of the organisation behind them at 2 o'clock in the morning. Yeah. They have got to think more on their feet than their counterparts in the day. Now, that's not to diminish the qualities of the people in the day. It's just to recognise that the skill set's slightly different out of hours, so to speak. Yeah. Some of those people, therefore, had that resourcefulness and had that ability, and they would be more, I found them to be more attuned to saying to you what the issues were and what the problems were. Yeah. I encouraged a couple of these people to go on the management assessment centres, and they'd historically I don't say been made to think, but probably had the impression, oh, it's not for us. You can't go, you can't move up the organisation and all the rest of it. But I was quite keen to actually demonstrate it's not about that. It's because management largely is about people. It's about managing people. It's about understanding people, and it's how you work that relationship. It's not about being liked, and it's not about being disliked and aggressive. It's about being respected and getting in the middle with it.
Yeah.
And at this assessment centre, we did several things that you clearly wouldn't understand in your line of business. So role play, a few tests, and so on and so forth. And at the end of the day, we did the multipliers and all the adding up and all the rest of it. And there were 3 clear people that had done well in the day across a whole range of diverse things. And there were 3 or 4 other people sat with me, 2 of whom were managers of the people that we were assessing, direct managers. And one of these managers said, when we were talking about these 3 individuals, one of whom was this girl, well, I'm not so much certain about that person. To which I said, well, why is that then? Well, they're a troublemaker. I said, right, I don't recognise that. I said, can you sort of elucidate a bit more? Well, they come often and say this needs dealing with and that needs dealing with. I said, right. So that's why you've given them that description then? Well, yeah, well, pretty much, yes. I said, right. I said, so actually what they come to you with is they come to you with problems and they're asking you or telling you about it. Yeah. I said, well, with respect, they're not a troublemaker. The reason they're coming to you with a problem is because they care.
Yes.
They care about this business. They care about our customers. They care about getting it right. They care about doing their job properly themselves. And your job as a manager is to enable that and support them. That's your job, not to see them in a negative way because they happen to be bringing stuff. And you know what? The clue is in your title, manager. It is about managing the issues which come your way from whichever way they come. And I think the overall piece from that, which I would say to people is, I know it can be difficult, all according to who your manager is. But if you do things in a personable way, if you present a problem and you suggest a solution where you can, you are trying to improve that business. You're trying to help that manager. You're trying to improve yourself as well. And the key thing I would say also is if that individual has a manager that is difficult around that and has a difficulty grasping it, then you do have to be bold enough to say, do you want me, manager, to tell you what you want to hear or what you need to hear? Because we all know it's the second, not the first.
There is a difference. I think you make a really good point, and I was lucky enough to have a manager early on in my career who used that exact phrase that you used earlier. Nina, don't bring me problems, bring me solutions. I think you make a really good point that they needed to know what the problem was, but they also needed to know what I thought we could do about it. And for me, at that stage in my career, it was hard. That made it more difficult because it was far easier, isn't it, to just go and put that problem on somebody else's desk and get on with your own work, but actually made your job so much more interesting because it gets your mind thinking about, well, okay, what is the art of the possible? How can we solve it? And as you said earlier, it may be not my ideas that were taken forward, but it helped me to start thinking differently. It helped me demonstrate to my boss that actually I was able to think differently. I was able to use my initiative. So as a development tool for the individual, it's cracking, but also for the manager themselves to have people in the team who don't just come to them with problems, but come and say, this is what I think we can do about it. So a really sound piece of advice there. Thank you for that. I really appreciate it. 90 volunteers were recruited to Friends of the Shakespeare Line. Now, I find this fascinating, and I know that there are literally thousands of people, aren't there, across the UK rail network at stations up and down the land who volunteer their services at railway stations. There's a romance about the railway, isn't there? There's something that we are attached to, and you took us back in your memory there to, I could almost see the steam coming out of the engine with you and your grandfather stood on the platform at Stratford-on-Avon. So there is a romance about it, and people are quite sentimental, I think, about the railway. But even so, I don't think we should underplay the challenge behind getting people to volunteer to come and do a job, which quite oftentimes is not an easy job. It can be a tough role. How did you do that? Where did you start, Fraser? How did you know where to start in terms of where do you get them from? How do you know they're the right people? And what are they delivering on the Shakespeare line? What do these people do in their roles as volunteers?
Right. So the first thing I'd say ahead as a precursor to the answer is what we've ended up with, I could never, ever have envisaged.
Right.
So if somebody had suggested doing what's happened, I probably wouldn't have believed them. So to answer your question, how I went about it was basically literally going out to those communities. It is about shoe leather. It is about going out there and putting yourself out there. Now, it's not like hard sell down the high street and trying to get somebody signed up to something. It's not that. But it is about going out to each of those communities and understanding who's doing what in there. So for some of those communities, it was an approach to the parish council. Not to ask the parish council to do it, because that's too easy. They've got lots of things on they've got to do anyway, and they might not say no, but they probably can't commit wholly to it. But they are a route in. They will know who the doers are in their community. And if they can enable that, and pretty much, if I might say so, the sort of stuff that you do, Nina, in terms of matching people against the sort of stuff that they want in terms of job opportunities and careers, it's no different, because it's about finding that conduit, finding that connection, that network, and getting that link to happen. And once the link happens, it works. What you can't know until you do it is what is out there. What we have proved is it definitely is out there. It's just a case of finding it. So it's not that it's not there. And I had a conversation a few weeks ago with some people in an area where they're thinking about doing this stuff. And somebody said, well, it's really, really difficult to get volunteers. And I don't know whether we'll have them in this area. And I said, well, I can understand why you say that, but I can absolutely tell you, although I don't know anything in detail about this area, those people will be living here now and they will be here. It's just a case of getting to them, finding them, inspiring them and encouraging them to come out. So it was things like parish councils, letters in parish magazines, local societies, who was involved where along the line, and touching base. There were a few people already involved, but they were crying out for help because they were trying to do stuff. I mean, one case, there was a lovely couple in Hall Green. They were spending their own money doing the plants on the station because they couldn't work out how they could be helped or whatever else. But you see, because I went to Hall Green and found them, that unlocked a load of stuff. Then I found out they worked at Sahel Mill, which of course has links to J.R.R. Tolkien. That one of the two of them was involved with Hall Green Library, doing a lot of community stuff, and so on and so forth. And then said, I think you could get some help down the line at a couple of these other stations. So we're next station up and it's within a really socially disadvantaged area of inner city Birmingham. So it's in the top 10% of most socially disadvantaged areas in the UK. Right. The station known as Spring Road. I said, how are we going to get any adopters to come forward there? And some folk were saying, you can't get this happening in city areas and you can't get people involved and there's a load of vandalism and all the rest of it. Well, there is vandalism and there are issues, of course there are. But I went and found who the local councillors were and I went and spoke to them and I said, look, not looking for you to do it, but who are the movers and shakers in this area? There must be people you know. That ended up with the 260th Birmingham Scout Group adopting Spring Road Station. Brilliant. And it's gone from strength to strength. Yeah. Young people in the heart of an area that is, and the thing that I've learned, well, first is you never stop learning. Yeah. But the thing that I've learned is that there are good people despite you cannot get hung up with this, oh, well, that's a bad area, or that's a good area, that's well heeled, or that's quite a poor area. You can apply those labels. It's not the right thing to do in any case. There are good people in all of the areas that you can ever find houses and people living. And many of them want to give something back to their community. They just need to know how they can do that and be enabled to do it. So there are a couple of examples. Further down the line, a secondary school adopted Withall Station. That's been a tremendous example, which we'll come back to, I'm sure, before we finish. And so you've got what you call more traditional volunteers that have come forward that give us really great floral displays, that are very much involved in biodiversity, botany and that sort of thing, as well as things like the secondary school at Withall, the Scouts at Spring Road, and so on and so forth. So the 90 volunteers came forward, and what happened was, when we got to probably, I don't know, about 45, 50, then people say, oh, do you know what, I'm going to have a word with such and such because they live 2 miles down there. I reckon they get involved, get with the station, and it started to snowball. And then you actually are not doing all the work, because without you knowing, you've started to set up a network. I now know a load of people who I didn't know before, and here's the piece. I have met some tremendously inspirational people in the last 3 or 4 years since this was all unravelled. People who've retired or people who've finished in careers that bring a diversity and a background and an experience that they are offering freely to use for the benefit of the community and the railway. And that's the bit that I guess links in, which we'll probably come on to, about how the railway with less money does more with less. And I think there's some key answers here in this. If we get this right, we can absolutely look towards a bright future in terms of our station environments and getting communities closer to the railway.
This might be a really, it might be an impossible question, Fraser, but I feel like I want to ask it anyway. What is it about the railway that makes people want to give up their free time, and in the case of the couple at Hall Green, their own money, to supporting their local railway station? Why do people do this?
I think that's a cracking question, Nina, and you'll pardon me, I'm sure, if I say that if I had a complete answer to it, I'd know what the 6 numbers are this week on the lottery. But I'll have a shot at it, but I think it will only be a partial answer. I think in general, the answer has to be, it means different things to each person. But you're right, and I understand why you asked the question, because it's a fascination, isn't it? It's a fascination. Why is it? Why are people? I think the key thing is, we don't stop to wave at a car, do we? But we do stop to look at a train. We do stop to wave at a train. There's just something about a train. There's something about the rails. I remember listening with interest, because you can listen to all the Desert Island Discs recordings that have ever been made on BBC Sounds. And I remember listening to the Reverend Audrey, who, of course, the wonderful man that gave us the Thomas the Tank Engine stories, explaining in part this phenomenon. And he basically said, he was talking more about steam engines, admittedly, but he was saying, a steam engine is a living being. It's like a human being. It will tell you what it thinks. It'll tell you if it's angry. It will tell you if it's not pleased. It will tell you if it's happy. And one of the records he wanted playing was of a train going up the Lickey Incline in Worcestershire. And I thought that what he said summed up to some extent why railways are somewhat unique, because he said that he clearly had this ability to bring it to life. And he said, it's a freight train that's going up this bank. There's a steam engine on the front, and there's 2 pannier engines at the back pushing to help it get up the bank. And the engine at the front saying, I can't do it, I can't do it, I can't do it. And the panniers at the back are saying, yes, you can, yes, you can, yes, you can. And it humanised it. And I think when I talk to the volunteers, not just, down the Shakespeare line, but across the whole area, because you're right, there's thousands of these guys all over the UK, and we're better for it. All of them just love the railway because they just feel it links their area to a national system. And the best I can put it is, it's a spine. The railway is a spine across the UK with all of the branches out of it. And it's about being connected. It's about bringing the uniqueness of your community to the railway and getting something out of it, because I think there's such a human touch to it. The train crews talk to the volunteers, you know, how you doing today? All right. And you know, all green. And I can't keep saying the couple there. It's Howard and Sandra crack in there. And Sandra's got a poetry board and she updates it every month. And a lady came up to her and moved her to tears when she said one day, she said, do you put this poetry on here every month? And she said, yes. She said, you know what? Some days when I'm going to work, I know what sort of a day I've got going. She said, and it's really a day perhaps I wouldn't want to face. I stand here and read these poems and it just gets me to a different place and I am able to face the day. Now, when she told Sandra that, Sandra was moved to tears.
Yeah, I bet.
And it, you know, it gets me.
In my throat now.
It gets me because you know what? That's when people talk about making a difference. Lots of folks say it.
Yes.
Do you know what? When something like that happens, you know you have made a difference.
You know you've done it.
And I think that's what drives a lot of people, because if you speak to a lot of volunteers, folks getting off trains will say, thanks for what you do here. It's absolutely fabulous. And for somebody just to say that when they don't have to, makes a big difference to people who are volunteering. And hey, I know I'm extending perhaps the answer a little bit. We're also doing something else. And I'm not starting to stereotype the volunteers because they're all from all walks of life. They're young, old, and all the rest of it. But for some people, it's therapy. And that therapy is lesser or greater, all according to their personal circumstances. And that's another reason why it's so important. We talk about mental health. It helps passengers that are stood there. Who knows what it might have prevented somebody doing because there's a lovely floral display at a station that otherwise would be urban and uninviting. Who knows, that volunteer, if they were not gainfully employed doing that, who may have had a personal tragedy or loss, who might have thought, you know what, is it worth carrying on? Who knows? All I know is it has to be better in the sum of things for all of this to be happening. And I think that's the driver. So partial answer.
I think that's a brilliant answer. And you've brought a lump to my throat with the example of Sandra's poetry board. But generally speaking, so I've been working with the rail industry for 11 years now, and I chose it because I felt that there was opportunity here because of the change and the transformation that needed to take place. I knew nothing about the industry when I came into it. I'd been on a train and my great granddad was a station master. He worked for British Rail. I have his long service certificate on the desk next to me, but I have very limited knowledge of the railway. What I was not expecting for 1 minute was the way that it grabs hold of you and becomes so much more than a series of trains on a series of tracks going through a series of stations. And I keep coming back time and time again to the fact that it isn't about the trains, it's all about the people. And everything that you've just said, I completely and utterly agree with. And whether that's the people who are working on the trains, in the ticket offices, in the offices, whatever role they have, or the volunteers that are doing the roles they're doing, everybody is making a difference, and it is a fundamental difference. And as you've said, sometimes we don't know what that difference is, but it can be quite significant. Tell me more about the secondary school and the work that was done with Withall Station.
Yes, thanks for that, because it's actually fascinating. And I must say that without diminishing any of the stuff that goes on at some of the other stations, which is largely around the plants and making the stations great, because that's absolutely fabulous, as I've already just outlined the effects that has. It's been good that we've been able to show there's a broader opportunity here, and that opportunity is open to whoever, wherever, where there's a station. So Faye Easton was very much involved, who first put us in contact with one another with West Midlands Trains, and so were Network Rail, and still are. So Woodrush Academy, which is a secondary school that's in Worcestershire, but it's right on the border of Worcestershire with Solihull and Birmingham, and it's sort of, its pupil background is sort of a third from each of those areas, roughly speaking. is led by an inspirational head teacher called Jay Barber and a really inspirational head of humanities called Andy Rees. Now, Andy Rees was the guy that came forward and said, you know what, we'll adopt Withall Station. We'll get some of our students down there. If you can put some planters in for us, we'll get them done. We want to get a bee post in, do some of the biodiversity stuff, because I want to bring some of this to life for our students and to understand the real environment. I want to see how it affects the public and so on and so forth. They were the early days. Yeah. So I went out and met Andy, which is another key thing, comes back to one of your earlier questions. Not only have you got to go out and meet folks, you've got to keep that relationship going, and you get to know one another better. You get to know what makes people tick. You get to know what's possible, what's not possible, who to ask to do that and who to ask to do that, and who can help one another, so on and so forth. And going out and speaking to Andy, Andy said, you know what, we should make something more of what we're doing here. And I said, well, what do you mean? And he said, you know what I'd love to do? He said, I'd love to get a qualification for these students that are doing this. I said, well, what do you mean? And he said, well, a City and Guilds, MVQ. I said, that'd be brilliant. I said, you know what, I reckon it'd be the first in the route based on railway volunteering, probably in the UK. Yeah. I said, you know what, let's explore it. So we explored it, and I explored it with West Midlands Trains, and they were operating the Customer and Communities Investment Fund, CSIF Fund, and went back quickly to Woodrush and said, you know what, put an application in and apply for this. Let's work with West Midlands Trains, put it in, see if we can get the funding. It'll have to go in with all the other bids. It might not work, but if we don't put in, we definitely won't get it. So we put the application in and we got funding. And that funding unlocked MVQ2 City and Guilds in Horticultural Studies for up to 15 students in year 1, moving up to double that number in year 2. It enabled the school to put a post in place to make that happen. And here's the key piece. This was designed to particularly support students that do not want to follow an academic route when they go from school into the world to carry on with their careers. This is more for the students that want to look for a vocational sort of qualification and pursue that type of area. And I think we can all agree that that area over the last couple of decades has been sorely left behind to some extent. I know a lot of people are on board with it now, and that's great. And that was another reason why we wanted that to happen. Now, we're now in year 2 of that, and it's grown even further because Network Rail have got involved, and their HR people have been in, and they're working with Woodrush, and now they're looking at developing. So 2 key things here. We hear lots about industry getting into education to provide to industry students that have the wherewithal to come out to the workplace fit to work. Yes. And there's been a lot of criticism from the workplace that's not been the case. So here's the piece. Network Rail have gone in and they're talking to Woodrush and developing, right, what is it that we're looking for in a student that comes out at 18 that might not necessarily be looking to go down an academic route, but would be interested in a modern apprenticeship? How can we get in at year 8 and show them a trajectory and give them the advice and nurture them and inform what subjects there should be and so on and so forth, so they can get themselves into the best possible place that by the time they get to 18, they've got a serious chance of getting an opportunity in a career of that sort. That work started and it's ongoing. And it's really, really good. And if people think that, so on and so forth, it's absolutely attracted a lot of interest. And Lord Peter Hendy is very much supportive of it, and indeed is due to visit Woodrush very soon to go and see the work himself, because, as you know, he's a big advocate himself of the young people and careers and the railway as a potential, and transport as a potential area with a whole raft of different careers possible. So that's been also the bit with Woodrush. The other thing they did, there's no bounds to them, is their IT students. We gave to them a challenge and said, can you develop a geocaching adventure using what's known as the Adventure Lab, which is a mobile phone-based treasure hunt, basically. And can you use the Shakespeare line as the adventure? So they did, and they developed it, and they worked with geocaching.com, who are based in San Francisco, and they launched the first railway-based geocaching adventure in the world.
Oh my word!
They launched that last year, and it's on the Adventure Lab. So Woodrush show that where there is that focus, that linkage between education, the local community, and the railways, whoa, what a story that is. And two other points I'd make is the ticket office at Withall has not been used for many years. They've now took a community lease on that, and they're now using it to support their adoption activities at the station, but they're also looking at having it as a bit of a meeting place for local people to come and see what they're doing as an academy, so they can understand all of those things. And that's a positive as well that comes out of it. And the overall piece is that this is all about how you bring those components together and make it work. And I think that they're a brilliant example of that, because they've done the geocaching stuff, they've got the MVQ running, they're developing the apprenticeship stuff. There is no limits to what they're demonstrating is possible, and that has to be the right thing.
It's just brilliant to hear about, Fraser. So I knew I'd kind of spoken to Faye, and she told me about the NVQ for the school, but I didn't know about the geocaching. I didn't know about the apprenticeship side. So it's absolutely music to my ears. One of the things that I think we need more focus on in the industry is the fact that whilst we've talked for certainly as long as I've been working with the industry, we knew about the aging workforce. We knew that people are going to kind of pop off the other end in terms of the working their careers and being eligible for retirement. Although obviously people can come back, as we're being demonstrated to today. But where there seems to be, or my perception is, there is less awareness of the fact that there are less than 4% of people in the whole workforce for the rail industry, less than 4% are aged 25 and younger. So we've got a bit of a steep hill to climb in order to fill the hopper in terms of who's going to replace these literally thousands of people, 75,000 people in the next 5 years that are due to retire. How are we replacing them? We're not getting enough in at the other end. So when I hear about schemes like this, I feel like, yes, that's brilliant. We need to showcase it. Everybody needs to know about it. How do we replicate it and have it all over the UK and not just in the Midlands, Amazing work. Absolutely.
A key thing on that, Nina, because you're absolutely right. So part of the piece actually talks to what you've just said there. So part of the development of what's happened at Woodrush, certainly with the MVQ, is that it was developed in a way that it can be lifted and applied and used at other academies. That was very much in the design of it. So they're quite keen to share it with other academies because they're not in competition with other academies. No. If an academy, even 20 miles down the road, let alone 100 miles down the road, can lift it and use it themselves, then why would they not do that? So you're absolutely correct. And one other key quick thing on it, when we talk about that shocking percentage that is so low, you're right. So this work has started. You're right. We've got to expand it. We've got to make it happen. It won't be immediate, but if we've started it, it will start to come through. If we do nothing, then we will get what we've always got, and we're going exactly the wrong way. That's not what we can afford to happen. So, it is the right thing to do. The other benefit, of course, is there is a here and now benefit. By doing the stuff at Woodrush, I would say to anybody listening or watching this today, what do you think the parents of the children at Woodrush now think about Network Rail and the railway? And I'd venture to suggest to you, they think a lot more. Well, first of all, they think about the railway. And they think about the train. Some of them may not use it. Well, if we've encouraged them to think about using it, that's great. But even more importantly, I bet their impression of the railway and trains is much more positive because they see how the linkage is happening between the industry and the sector and how the opening of doors enabling that business link into education, that opportunity for the students, that support to the school because they need support. They're the same as everybody else. They're under budgetary pressure and everything else. All comes together. That's a positive, and that's a benefit the railway gets from it too.
It's a huge benefit. There's like a ripple effect, isn't there? And lots of unintended consequences of saying, of Andy Rees from Woodrush saying, I think we could do something here. All right, okay, well, we'll do this one thing, and then that results in something else, which results in something else, and a Network Rail then getting involved, and Lord Hendy going to visit, which will no doubt give another kind of spotlight onto the programme of work that's being done. How do you then get that out, and how does that ripple effect happen to other academies, but also the goodwill from it, the change in perceptions of the railway, encouraging people to use the railway? And you're talking to young people here from year 8 onwards, when their behaviours are being built, their habits are being built for their adult life, and encouraging them to understand the railway, use the railway, perhaps have a career on the railway in the future, and tell their friends about it, and their parents tell their friends about it. It's just this amazing ripple effect. I could talk to you for hours about this. I said at the beginning, I've got a huge passion for what the people in the Community Rail Network do. I think you do an amazing job. If I was to give you 3 wishes, Fraser, for what you would like to see change to enable Community Rail to do even more, or the reach go even further, what would those 3 wishes be?
Right. So I guess the first one would be, I think what we do need, so there's a tremendous support for Community Rail already. I mean, it's funny enough, we've just been talking about Woodrush. As we're doing this podcast today, 2 Community Rail partnerships, the Heart of England and Worcestershire, are actually meeting at Woodrush to understand more about how they can pick stuff up and take it forward. So that's great. And on that theme, really, one thing's definite, and I learnt this in my earlier career. The railway is an asset-based industry because it's an asset that's managed that provides a service. Now, throughout my early career, or what I would call my main career, and now being enticed back out of retirement to do this, but I'm doing it because I'm enjoying it. That's the main point. And anybody in a job,
and it shows,
if you're not, thank you. Anybody in a job, if you're not enjoying it, seriously, you do need to think about, is there something better you can do? Because you've got to enjoy what you're doing to be halfway where you need to get to. Otherwise, it's always going to be difficult. So I've come back out and I'm enjoying it. But so in that main career and in this, it's an asset-based industry. Now, back in that main career, there was always this argument or disagreement, whatever you want to call it. Well, we're an asset infrastructure company that provides a service, or we provide a service with assets and infrastructure. Which one is it? Yes. Are we a customer service organisation, or are we an asset organisation? Yeah. Well, I always, and I remained of this view, and I don't think I will ever move from it. I've always took a very simplistic view of things, and it's probably easy to demonstrate it with the railway because you can get it in model form. So what I've always said is, the assets that are there for only one purpose, and that is to provide a customer service, whether it be for freight. Let's not forget freight. That's important, particularly in sustainability terms and environmental terms, but also for people and passengers. Neither of those existed, there would be no need, nor reason, or purpose for the railway to be there. Of course, you have to have engineers. You have to have asset infrastructure people that know what they're doing, who have to be at the top of their game to manage and operate a system. And I stand back in awe at the ability of some of the people I've seen in the last few months these first few months I've been here at Network Rail, and the guys that they've got on that front. Really able people that are running a network 24/7 in very difficult circumstances. Absolutely. And they do get the bit about they're trying to keep delay minutes to a minimum. It's about customer service. But to come back to your question, I've digressed a bit. I apologise.
You're in good company for that, Fraser.
It is about, at the end of the day, getting an understanding that the customer is the reason why the industry is there.
Yeah.
And that was the same where I worked in the water industry. Sewage works and water treatment works were not there to manage assets as a hobby. They were there to provide a service to customers. It's the same in the railway industry. Now, within that, community rail, to answer your question directly, the one thing I would wish, and I do wish for, and I guess to some extent we're starting to make this move, because Denise clearly gets it, and Central Route that she's leading, I think gets it, which is understanding that we've got to get a greater understanding in the railway, so that's in Network Rail, but also the train operators, what volunteers can bring. Now, of course, the first thing that one has to say is there are things volunteers can never do or go anywhere near for sound, safety, operational and other reasons. But that should not translate into it's a no for everything, because it isn't a no for everything. And if you look at what's happened with the Canal and River Trust, where they've been on a tapering reduced grant from government since they were turned into a trust of 2010, they very carefully but done well in moving a lot of their activity to a volunteer base, and therefore saved a lot of money that they otherwise would have had to have shelled out or not done the activity at all. Right. Now, they've still got to do core stuff with proper contractors or directly employed people, and this isn't, nor should it be, ever about taking people's jobs. But, just the fact that you can unlock perhaps areas without any safety issues so that volunteers can keep the litter under control, remove it, make it look nicer. That helps the operator's SQR score. So they're a winner. And it's getting the understanding across the train operators, across everywhere, the full benefits of what volunteers give. Because they're eyes and ears, unpaid eyes and ears on your asset that are telling you, so they're, what I was saying earlier, they're the troublemaker, because if they see something wrong, they'll know somebody at Network Rail or at the train operator, or I'm ringing up, there's a light gone out, or there's a manhole that's broken or something. Hey, now if that person wasn't there, that might go on for another week, and worst case, somebody could trip over the manhole and have an injury. So there's real benefits to this. The challenge, I guess, for the industry is we've got to channel the volunteers, so we use them in a way that they get something out of it, but also the industry gets something out of it, because they're doing the things that we want, but also that they want. And I think that in Central Route, we're showing that we can bring those two elements together. We've just agreed a number of areas on the cross-city line where we're going to be able to get volunteers into areas, going to keep it a lot cleaner and make it better. And that's working closely with West Midlands Trains and Central Route. And that's hitherto not been the case. There's lots of opportunities when you go around the network across Britain where you could do that. So, number one, industry understanding the full benefit of what volunteers bring.
Yes.
Number two, a bit more difficult really. Number two would be understanding or getting government and others to understand how volunteers unlock this piece, and how they've got to remove the shackles from the railways to be able to manage that business effectively. The one key thing I would say is I think the route design in terms of Network Rail's operational structure is right. The development process is right. And the more that can be done and the community can sit under that devolved route, the better. I don't think that community or community rail, whatever you want to call it, that's not going to work in any guise efficiently if it's centrally ran or centrally controlled. To me, this is about local communities linking in with local teams and the local management or the regional area or the route, because the route know where they're talking about, they know where they're talking about, and they can make the right judgments about investment, about activity, about all those things really. And I just think that devolved piece is something we should build on, the geographical model, and we should avoid centralisation wherever possible. The third thing comes back to something I mentioned right at the beginning. And I suppose you can always have a dream, can't you?
You're very welcome to dream in these three.
This is a dream, but it's an important dream. And it's picking up something I mentioned earlier on, which is inverting that triangle. It's about everybody understanding wherever they are, whether it's an organisation like a train operator, a community rail, Network Rail, Marks and Spencer's, Tesco, anyone for that matter. The point of contact with your customer is the critical element to your business model, your brand, that customer and that customer's potential loyalty. Now, as a customer, if you show to me that you know me, you understand me, and you care about me, I'll give you in return my loyalty. And if you keep consistently showing me that you know, understand and care, my loyalty to turn into even to a point where you can get me to change my behaviour. Because you have such a level of credibility with me, I will think of other things. That might be other products, that might be other services, but it may be also about getting me to make more different ethical choices. But you can't get to that unless you can demonstrate to a person that you know, understand and care. And that's why if you're a manager in an organisation that's got staff that report to you, and those staff are dealing with your customers, your most important role in my book is to be supporting those people at the front. Never ask them to do a job that you wouldn't be prepared to do yourself, and give them the support. And the one other thing would be to, within this third, is to get managers to feel that it's always right to make a decision. One of those anecdotes, and probably it's fortuitous that it's took till now to get to this point, given everything we've discussed, is one that I've always tried to carry with me. And I was told early on when I became a manager at that sort of middle level, now look, it's as simple as this. You're going to make some wrong decisions. Be comfortable about that. That is about the organisation having your back and being prepared to let you make those wrong decisions. The trick is, don't make the same wrong decision twice and learn from your wrong decisions. And over time, if you learn from them, you don't make the same one twice, you will start moving the dial so that you make more right decisions than you make wrong decisions. And as a manager, I welcome you if you make some wrong decisions and some right decisions. Give me a manager of that ilk every day, but never give me a manager that won't make a decision. Because a manager that won't make a decision will never achieve anything, will never be able to support their staff, and basically is no use in the role. So it's about being comfortable about making the wrong decisions. And that's also about organisations making sure that they have got the back and they will support managers that will take the initiative and make a decision. Because we do live in a world that's increasingly risk averse, and people who are genuinely frightened or concerned about making a decision because of the ramifications. In my experience of life, very few people, if any, make a reckless decision knowing it's reckless. If that person's made a decision and they've made that decision based on the best information they've got at that time, then I would commend that person for making that decision. And I just think if we can get a better understanding and better support for people doing that, to give that service at the front line, so as a recipient or as a customer, you get that better piece, you get recognised, you get the organisation to a better place.
Brilliant. A really good point. And we have that I really can relate to from a personal perspective, because in my business, we've definitely got a philosophy that you win some and you learn some. So whatever you do, do something. And if it turns out to be the right thing, happy days. If it turns out to be the wrong thing, what do we do about it? What have we learned from it? How do we do it differently next time? And yeah, there's a lot, I've read a lot recently around kind of the benefits of failing, because if you've failed, it means you've tried in the first place, which is actually so much better than sitting there doing nothing. Fraser, I've found our conversation so fascinating, and I definitely could sit and talk to you for hours. I've got to bring the conversation to close with one last question for you. In terms of, I always love to ask people when they come onto the podcast about their inspiration. So do you know those days when you might not feel like you want to kind of bounce into work or bounce off to do the job, and it's kind of everything's feeling a bit more difficult? And you just need to plug yourself into something to give you a boost of inspiration or motivation. What inspires you? Where do you go for that?
I'm inspired by a couple of things, really. One does go back to my very early days, when I remember my dad, and I haven't obviously got a lot of memories of him because I was only very little, but I do remember one day coming out the shop in the village in which we lived, and there was an elderly lady called Mrs. Cooper waiting to cross the road. And at that time, my father was an MOD policeman, and he just stepped into the road and did this and stopped the traffic.
Right.
And he got Mrs. Cooper across the road. I watched this, and of course, like any kid, they'd be proud of the parents. I thought, well, that's good, you know, he's important, he's done that. When we got to the other side of the road, he turned to me and he said to me, now he said, remember what I've just done, he said, always look out for other people in life who might not be as fortunate as you, whether they can cross the road, whether it's that they're not in the right place with things, and help them.
Yeah.
He couldn't make it any more detailed than that because I was only little, but
Yeah.
he just said, give me a message about helping other people.
Yeah.
I often think about that. I haven't got everything, and nor do I expect to have everything, but I'm able-bodied, I'm able-minded, and if I can help other people, that in itself inspires me.
Yeah.
But I do get days, I've got to be honest with you, Nina, we all get days, don't we, when I think, do you know what am I doing this for, or whatever else, and you've got to be honest, you know, we all do have those days. Now, when I get to that point, it's not just as simple as I've explained. I do have to think things to try and steel me to get past from that. I find music is very, very, very important. Music does do things in terms of motivate me. But there is one key individual that I have over years come to admire, and it's known by some people, it's not so well known by others. And it's a guy known as Lord Dowding, Hugh Dowding, who was the Air Vice Marshal that led this country in the Battle of Britain. Wow. So he was the guy that basically led Fighter Command in the Battle of Britain. Right. He was a very, very understated individual. He never sought the limelight. He was disliked because he would say it as it was. And he would not say it shouting from the rooftops. He would just say it. But what he did do, he had his pilots uppermost in his mind. He never wavered, despite the odds, which, as we all know, were absolutely stacked against us. And he stuck to what he felt was the right thing with his people. His people delivered for him. And if you ever listen to any of them, most of them, if not all, have now gone. But if you read the books, watch the films that have been recorded over the years, anybody that had anything to do with him said, well, we delivered because he delivered for us. He got our backs. And probably never in the history of this country have we faced such a ghastly period of time. That person had a steady hand on the tiller. And you know what I was thinking? It might sound very grandiose. Whatever any of us might face, it can't remotely come to anything close to what he had on his shoulders at that time. And he managed it. So we have no excuse but to otherwise do the same as him with whatever we face.
Yeah. Aren't people amazing in so many different ways? And you've taken this conversation into areas that I hadn't even dreamt that we would go. I knew that we'd be talking about community rail, and I've loved the stuff you've shared with us on that. And I would encourage anybody listening to this to explore further what the community rail partnerships are doing across the network and support where they can. But from me, Fraser Pithie, a huge thank you for joining me as a guest on the Intuitive Insights podcast. It's been fascinating. I've loved it. My face is hurting from smiling, but I've had a couple of emotional moments as well. So we've had it all going on in this conversation. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Nina. And if I can finish with a PS to say that anybody that wants to see the benefits of what we've talked about, so because having done the talk, you've got to walk the talk. When the podcast goes out, it will coincide with the opening of Henley and Arden railway station, which has been a derelict station for 30 years. That those volunteers have attracted nearly £500,000 in inward investment. They've turned it into a microbrewery and a community meeting point, and it opens in a couple of 3 weeks' time, about when this goes out, and folks will be most welcome to come to Henley and Arden and see what volunteering can bring to the railway and bring to the community, and that wasn't even thought of 3 years ago.
Amazing. Brilliant. A call to action for the end of the conversation. I love it. Thank you so much. And I have no doubt our paths will cross again in the future. I hope so.
Thank you, Nina.
My huge thanks to Fraser for joining me on the Intuitive Insights podcast, and to you for joining us too. I hope you've enjoyed the conversation. I would love you to like and subscribe to the podcast, and to tell your friends about joining us too. The more the merrier. Thanks ever so much. Have a good day.